Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, Chag Urim Sameach, all of the things, we're going to see. We have 3 Torahs up here. Before I actually get into what I'm going to say, what's the rule that tells us the order that we're supposed to read these Torahs in? What's the rule? There's a principle. Say it again. Least often last. Actually, you said it correct. You're correct, but you said it in the reverse. Misha tadir ve'eno tadir, tadir kodem. When there's a frequent and a less frequent one, the frequent one is first. So it's phrased in the frequent one being first as opposed to the least frequent last, but you're correct. So we start with the reading from Miketz, which is the one for Shabbat. Then we go to the reading for Rosh Chodesh, because that happens 12 times a year. Then we go to the reading of Chanukah, which happens just during this holiday, as we read through. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Chanukah. Let's talk about the story and the miracles of Chanukah. Because the question that I want to ask today is, which story is more relevant to us? Which story today in 2022 is actually more important for us to be studying, more important for us to be thinking about, and more relevant to us? So first of all, what are the 2 stories? What are the 2 narratives that we have, the 2 miracles, so to speak, of Chanukah? One of them is the military victory, right? The military victory. If we read the book of Maccabees, we read that it was a victory of the few against the many, right? And that in spite of overwhelming odds, we went in and we won. And we rededicated the temple. And that was the first miracle that we talk about of Chanukah, was this victory of the few against the many. And it was a victory, let's talk about it, for a second, it was a victory to stand up for our beliefs, right? What were the Maccabees fighting against? Not just against the tyranny of Antiochus, but they were actually fighting against Hellenization. They were fighting against assimilation. They were fighting against the dilution of Judaism and the desire that world had at the time to say, we want to just be like everyone else. What the Hellenistic Greeks are doing is great. So what if we need multiple gods? Sure, we can do that because we want to just be like everyone else, right? And the Maccabees were fighting against that, and they stood up and they ultimately won. Okay, the second miracle is the oil, right? The miracle of the oil, the purified oil, right? So at the end of all of this is how the rabbis connect the stories together, right? At the end of all of this, they wanted to rededicate the temple. The menorah that was there didn't quite look exactly like that, but it had that sort of overall shape, right? The 7-branch candelabra, not the 9-branch Chanukiah that we use nowadays, right? But the 7-branch candelabra that was lit on a daily basis for each day of the week needed to be relit. And it had to have specially prepared oil, and there was only one vial of the oil that was left, and it lasted for the 8 days, which was the amount of time that it took to create this new vial of oil. Now, we also know the 8 days of Sukkot, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but let's put that aside for a moment, right? Let's put that aside for a moment. So my question then is, what is the message? Both of these in our tradition are seen as miracles. So what is the message of each of these miracles? And let's have a conversation about which we think may be more relevant to us today. Go ahead.
Obviously, the right answer is probably both, but I think it depends, from what lens we're looking at it, like either personal lens, a Jewish lens, or even, I would say, a Zionist lens.
Okay.
And so the state of Israel, in and of itself, Medina Israel, is kind of a miracle. We see this tiny little state the size of country the size of New Jersey with enemies on all sides, and 75 years later, we have still an established state of Israel. It's not a coincidence that the menorah is actually the symbol of Israel. So I would say sort of that whole idea.
So Diana, let me just reflect back so that people who are listening at home can hear. Diana is saying that it actually depends on which lens you're looking. And the answer may be a little bit of both. It's a good Jewish answer, by the way. Although I am going to come down on one side over the other today. And you sort of talked about the state of Israel of this miracle of the creation of enemies on all sides and all of that. And yeah, and we're going to come back to the state of Israel because I think what goes on and how we think about the state of Israel is very reflective of these two miracles also. And I do want to come back to that. Anybody else? Bruce.
I see a little parallel of Russia and Ukraine.
Russia and Ukraine, tell me.
Well, Ukraine's a small country. Their heritage Russia's trying to absorb them and take away their way of living. There is a parallel.
Yeah. Yeah, so what Bruce is arguing by talking about Russia and Ukraine is that this story isn't just a story of the past, it's actually happening today, right? It's happening today of a group that is trying to take over, that is trying to come in and, in effect, erase the culture, the values, the people of the Ukraine. And since the president of Ukraine is Jewish, he's probably leaning a lot into the Hanukkah story right about now, right? As he's thinking about that. Okay, good. What else? So we've got military victory. We've got both sort of arguing the military victory side of things.
I would also, because of the growing anti-Semitism that's going on, is the need for vigilance.
Good.
And so always having to be ready to fight back in whatever way you need to.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Mark said because of the growing anti-Semitism that we're seeing certainly in the United States and around the world, the message of fighting for one's values, being able to stand up for what we believe, standing strong against the face of persecution and potential annihilation is important.
I think also like the idea, maybe not as much like the oil, which was the purified oil that was used for a specific purpose, but just the idea of the menorah and the shining the light. To your point about the war in Ukraine, I mean, there's a lot of darkness around us, and a little bit of light, and as I think the Rebbe said, probably others before him too, a little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. Or
Right.
Reb Leonard Cohen
Mm-hmm.
also talks about the light getting in through the crack.
Right.
So
So,
it just takes a little bit, and if it's that sort of pure light, pure intentions, you can do so much with that and see. It helps you elucidate, illuminate, sparkle, whatever you want to use, all the words for light.
nice. So Diana is now reflecting, to use the light, right? Reflecting on the light side of things and saying, there's a lot of darkness in the world, and a little bit of light can really dispel a lot of darkness, right? It's the darkest room. It doesn't matter if it's a pitch black room. All it takes is that single candle, and all of a sudden now you've got light, and you can see, and you can grow, and you can do the things that you need to do. And so maybe that's the message that we have. Good. Anybody else? Please, Bard.
I see it as identical to today because here in America, at least for a lot of countries right now, the popular culture is affecting religions more than religions are affecting our.
So Vard is arguing that it's a sense of identity, not just a sense of existential existence of anti-Semitism stuff, but just a sense of identity. Vard said that popular culture is affecting religions and morals much more than morals and religions are affecting popular culture, and it is diluting to some degree who we are and the goodness that could be in the world. Okay. Anybody else? So I agree actually that both are necessary at certain times. The question is, What's more necessary now? And the way that I understand these two miracles maybe is a little bit different. My take on this is the miracle of the military victory is a miracle about necessity, right? It's about doing what's necessary in spite of the odds and knowing that God is there with us when we need to do those things that we need to do. The miracle of the light is a miracle about hope, right? So we have necessity versus hope. And I want to come back to Israel for a second because it's so interesting that I was sort of thinking about this. Israel is miraculous in so many different ways, no doubt, right? Israel is miraculous in so many different ways. But let's take two miracles of Israel. And which one do we need more? Which one do we need to talk about more? Let's take the miracle of Entebbe. Right? The miracle of Entebbe. For those who don't know, right? Entebbe, a plane was hijacked. There were Israelis that were on board. It was taken down into Africa, and ultimately, Israeli troops in a hugely daring mission, right, went and rescued the kidnapped people that were there, rescued the Jews that were there. It was a miracle on all accounts, and the minimal loss of life was even more miraculous, right? And by the way, if you've never heard of this, you should first of all look it up. There are a number of movies that are out there, both modern and older, rated on Entebbe and things like that, that will actually tell you about the story of Entebbe. Hugely miraculous, right? So that's one miracle of the state of Israel. And there have been others, by the way. That's just the one that's known. I guarantee you that there have been miraculous things that the IDF has done every day that nobody knows about, that's secret and we'll never know about, right? So that's one piece. And then let's go to the other side. The miracle of Israel as the startup nation, right? The miracle of the fact that this group of refugees, right? This group of refugees has done more to shape the technology and the way we live than just about any other place on earth, right? With all of their advances, with all of the technology, with all of this mindset of the startup nation, also a miracle. And I see, by the way, that those two are the same miracles as the one in Hanukkah. One is a miracle of necessity, and one is a miracle of hope. And the question is, which one do we need more today? For me, I would argue, and I think the rabbis did as well, that the miracle of hope ultimately is the miracle that we need to hold on to. Because the rabbis removed from the Talmud all of the story of the military victory. That's not what they focused on. Right? When we sing Hallel, when we celebrate Hanukkah, we're not celebrating the miracle, the military victory. It isn't until later in the Middle Ages that we got in our liturgy back the military victory, right? But if you look in the Talmud, it doesn't mention the military victory at all. It's as if it doesn't exist. Because for them, it was about hope. And I would argue today, right, when necessity arises, and it may very well be that necessity is arising, right? And we're going to have to respond to the necessities of the world. But when we celebrate this Hanukkah holiday, when we celebrate the values of the Hanukkah celebration, it's not about the miracle of necessity. It's about the miracle of hope. And it ultimately, to me, is answered in what was a basic conversation in our Talmud, right? The famous argument between Hillel and Shammai of how to light the Chanukiah. Necessity would argue that we light it in a rational sort of way. We start with 8, the next day we go down to 7, the next day we go down to 6, because whatever volume of oil that was there in the miraculous cruise, right? Okay, there was a little less, there was a little less, there was a little less each day. Right? Shammai, I've always understood Shammai and his school of thought to say, God rationed the oil. Right? God rationed the oil to say, okay, there's enough each day. And that's what that was reflecting of taking 8 lighting the first day and 7 lighting the second day and 6 lighting. But the school of Hillel came in and argued the opposite. They said, no, you start with the first and you go to the second. It's not that it was rationed. It's that every single day there was a miracle. And every single day we looked at that cruise and we said, we hope there will be a miracle the next day. And when it was, our joy was increased. And when it was, our joy was increased because it was a miracle of hope, not a miracle of necessity. And as we think about this Hanukkah, as we think about this new year, in the midst of Ukraine, in the midst of anti-Semitism, in the midst of all sorts of challenges now that are going on in Israel for those of us that are progressive Jews, right? We need hope. That's the message that we need. We need hope. And when necessity arises, we respond to it as we always have. But the miracle, the focus of this Hanukkah season should be one of hope and adding light into this world, not the other way around. Any last comments before we close and start to read our Torah readings? Yeah.
One of the other explanations of Shammai is, correct me if I don't say it right, but when you start out with all 8, besides sort of the practical thing, is also the idea of potential. And like you're starting out, this is like your full potential that you have. Mm-hmm. So I think that sort of does go with hope, but it's also, I don't know, it's a little bit more like tangible almost in a way. So it has to do with
Diana's arguing that one of the ways to understand Shammai is to think about the potential, right? On that first day, there's the most potential.
We just have to keep reaching up to that
right?
potential.
But the challenge with Shammai's view, no matter which way you understand it, is it's decreasing. Whatever that is decreasing.
And it feels weird if you've ever done it that way. It
Yeah.
feels so weird.
It does feel weird. So, my friends, I want to wish you all a very happy Hanukkah, a Hanukkah filled with light, a Hanukkah filled with hope, and depending on where you are in this country, a Hanukkah filled with heat, because it's very, very cold in a lot of areas within our country. So if you're watching from afar, please stay warm as we go. All right, let's begin our Torah readings, and I'm going to grab my book. We'll come back down here, and we'll start. Baruch Tieh.